Hey, welcome to the Strategic Success Podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Fricke. Thanks for tuning in. All right, you guys, welcome to another episode of the Strategic Success Podcast. Guys, today it's just going to be me, and I want to have a conversation with you about something that I feel is super important that doesn't get talked about enough in the real estate investor space. And really what I want to talk with you about is something that I feel is detrimental to people's success. So for some of you, you may know that in 2018, I started a real estate investors meetup. So it was called Northshore RIA. It still goes on today. I just no longer run it, but I ran it for, let's see, I ran it for 6 years. 6 years where, at minimum, a meeting a month, at some point, 4 meetings a month, okay? And over the years, we've had, a few thousand people come through the doors. And so I got to meet a lot of people, online, in person, all of that when I was building that community. And one of the things that I recognized a lot was that folks would come in bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. They were saying, hey, I want to invest in real estate. Okay. And by saying, I want to invest in real estate, thankfully they found a local real estate investor meetup. I'm a huge fan of them for a lot of reasons, between networking, education, a lot of that. It also consistently gets you in the room with like-minded folks, right? Because I believe you grow into the conversations you're around, and not a lot of people are friends with people who are also wanting to invest. Sometimes you get the privilege of that, but sometimes you don't. And so those meetings can be a way to, build and forge new relationships with people who are trying to obtain the same thing. So I've always loved local investor meetups for that. I no longer run the Northshore RIA, but I still attend, between the Northshore RIA, other ones in the greater New Orleans area, Baton Rouge, Mississippi, I attend them. I can't tell you how many times I've attended a conference and then attended a local investor meetup at the same time in the area. If I was, at the conference early, later, things like that. Those things are, for me, it's invaluable. But what I saw is that there were so many people who came in so excited, hey, I want to invest in real estate. They had these grand ideas of what that was going to look like or what it could look like. And unfortunately, what I saw and what people continue to see, this is nothing new, there's nothing new under the sun here, is that folks would fizzle out. So there was a very strong fizzle out rate. And what do I mean by that? So I remember very early on that there were, I was a part, it was myself and 4 others who kind of had like a Facebook Messenger chat going on. And we were all trying to get our next deals. And so we were kind of like, messaging, hey, how are things going? All that, how, have you been making offers lately, looking at properties? I am the only one still. It was a husband and wife, and then it was 2, single guys. And I am the only one still. Well, no, it wasn't 2 single guys. It was a guy and then a girl, and then her husband was somewhat involved, somewhat not involved. And I'm the only one still actively doing things that I know of. Okay. But what I saw was pretty early on, they would hit a roadblock, something would come up, some sort of hurdle would come up, and they would fizzle away. And so I want to talk about some things today to where, number one, this is the Strategic Success Podcast. It's the idea that you don't end up somewhere, wherever somewhere is for you. You don't end up there just by accident, right? You end up there by intention and design. Okay. And so I want to talk with you about how you can avoid, all the things that cause people to fizzle out, all the things that cause people to, not reach their destination. And that's not what I want for you. I want for you to be able to be very clear on what you want and to be able to obtain it, right? And to avoid these things that I see. So one of the big things is often I've had people say, "Hey, Courtney, I want to invest in real estate." And so I have um, a story that I often tell. It's when you say, "I want to invest in real estate," it's like you're going to the airport, you're walking up to the counter, and you are saying, "I want to fly to Europe." Can you buy a ticket with that, like an airplane ticket with that? No, they're going to look at you and just say, "Okay, who's going to tell them Europe's not a country," right? Like it's made up of a ton of countries, right? And even then, you can't say, "I want to go to France." You have to say, very specifically where you want to get a ticket to. Okay. So, no, you can't buy a ticket with that. That's too vague. So, saying I want to invest in real estate is too vague. Okay. So, you've got to take that grand idea and you've got to boil it down. The other part of that is if you go to the airport and say, "I want to fly to either Europe or France," regardless how vague, are you gonna have accommodations when you arrive, right? Let's just say you finally get a ticket somewhere. Will you have accommodations? No. Will you have packed, you're there with your suitcase. Will you have a packed accordingly? I don't know. I hope, right? And so there's a level there that by getting very clear on what you're trying to do, you can then build your team accordingly. You can build out your path. And then, one of the best things is with you getting clear on what you want, you can then build an action plan basically in reverse. It's the idea of with a GPS, same thing, right? It's picking a destination. So I'm in New Orleans, and if I said I want to go to Los Angeles and I put that in my GPS, I need to be heading west. Now, if I'm heading northeast the entire time, like I'm going towards, New York City, something's not right. I need a course correct. Why? Because that's not in line with my final destination of where I'm trying to arrive. The hard part is if you've ever gotten in your car and you don't know like where you want to go, you're susceptible to, going any which way, right? How many times have you been hungry and you're like, "Hey, I want to get some food," but you're like so hungry to the point you're just like, "I don't know." I think investors get so hungry to be successful, they just say, "Well, I'm just going to chase every wind that sounds like success in real estate," right? They're like, "I just want to make money in real estate. I just want to own properties in real estate." So it's like they're chasing everything that sounds like that sounds good, right? So we call that shiny object syndrome. And this is something that I saw notoriously in the RIA. For the few years that I did private coaching, I saw that too. And I'll be honest, y'all, there is nothing hidden on the internet, right? Like you could right now go learn about just about anything on the internet. And one of the biggest things with coaching, and I learned this myself hiring coaches, right? But then also being a coach over the years, um, is that a lot of times coaching is not let me tell you the stuff that's already on the internet. A lot of times what coaching is, it's helping you, you know, realize, for example, the way you're self-sabotaging yourself. Coaching a lot of times helps you course correct. Like it's not necessarily information, it's more so helping you kind of correct the things that are hindering you. You have the information, but these things are hindering your actions. So, I mean, that was huge for me. Huge for me. So, you know, what's the thing that hinders a lot of people? It's shiny object syndrome, right? I mean, we all know this, especially again, people knew they're just again, oh, that sounds like a good idea. That sounds like a great way to make money in real estate. Hey, that sounds really good. And so then they're kind of prone to be pulled in every which way. And so, I mean, look, so today I'm not in front of my library, I'm in my office. You can see I have a lot for those of you who are watching the video either on YouTube or on Spotify. But for those of you listening, I have a whole bunch of binders here. They're anywhere from 1 inch to 4 inch binders because a lot of the conferences I attend, the style of conferences I attend give away, the binder with the curriculum for the weekend, the material, the course material. And so, I frequently attend 5+ conferences a year. A lot of times, 6 to 10 times a year, I'm going to conferences. And what happens? And I still do that now. 10 years later, I'm still attending conferences. And what does that do? That introduces me to new ideas. But I have gotten better at not jumping at everything I hear. So what does that look like? So for example, with the RIA or when I did coaching, I would have someone come to me and they're like, "Hey, I want to get into real estate investing." Okay. And I'm like, "Hey, tell me about, what are you doing? How are you getting started? What are the things that you're doing?" And a lot of times they would say, "Hey, look, I am, right now I am wholesaling." Okay. And so and so then I'd talk with them about how they are, tracking down owners, walking properties, making offers, things like that. And then I see them again, let's just say, maybe not the next meeting, but maybe 2 or 3 meetings later, say, "Hey, how's the wholesaling going?" "Oh, well, you know what? Um, I have decided that I'm going to get into Airbnb." And I'm like, "Okay, so did was wholesaling, oh, well, like I either didn't get a deal yet, or it was along the lines of, yeah, I mean, I got a deal or two, like it was fine, but I just think I can make much more money, or, doing Airbnb, things like that." I'm like, "Okay." And so then going down the path, you see, you know, a few months later, I would meet them. I'm like, "Hey, how are things going with your Airbnbs? Have you gotten one yet?" "No, no, I'm going to get into apartment syndications." Um, and I cannot tell you how many times I had that conversation with different people. And it wasn't always the same strategies, it wasn't always the same timelines. But what I found was so many folks would, um, really change course, right? So instead of going, the first destination wholesaling, that's going to Los Angeles. Next time I see them, say, "Hey, how are things going?" "Oh, I decided to not go to Los Angeles. I'm now going to, Boise, Idaho." Okay. Like there's, a bit of a shift there. And there's a lot that comes with that, right? Like that your team that you build, the actions that you do on a daily basis would have to change with each of those strategies. Although they are similar because they're all within the industry of real estate, they are different. Okay. And a lot of people don't understand this. So let me try to break it down in a like an allegory of some port, but just so that you can understand it. It is similar to saying, "I want to own," for example, say someday you say, "I want to own a restaurant, like a brick and mortar restaurant." Well, for example, you say, "Hey, it's too expensive to own a building and or to rent a building. And, I'm just really worried about the cost with that. So, you know what? I am going to do a food truck in the meantime." Can a food truck be a stepping stone to a brick and mortar? Yes, we see that happen. Are they the same? No, right? There's a lot of differences. For example, your kitchen size in a food truck is very different than a brick and mortar. In a brick and mortar, you have the ability to store. In a food truck, you don't. So you have different problems that come up with, a food truck than a brick and mortar, right? In a food truck, hey, if it's raining outside, you may be more impacted, right? So again, you have different challenges, you have potentially different clientele, you might have like all those things, right? And you might have to handle things like your inventory very different, and your staff very different. um Same thing if you were to say, "Hey, you know what? Owning a business, like a restaurant business and a brick and mortar, it's too cost prohibitive. I'm just going to do meal prepping out of my house. I'm just going to, make meal preps for people and sell them." Again, similar. You're still cooking. That's still the root of it. You're still cooking, but again, your clientele is very different. The marketing for it is very different. The challenges for it is very different. right? And so that is what I mean by doing different strategies. There may be some core parts to it that are similar, right? But there's going to be, your team is going to look different. The financing is going to look different. You know, all like the things you need to do on a daily basis are going to look different. So one of the biggest issues I have with shiny object syndrome, which we have all been victims of, is number one, with shiny object syndrome, you're number one, it is, and I think this is paramount here, is that you're not giving your efforts time to compound. What does that mean? So most people don't give this enough credit, but it's time in the business, it's time in the strategy you are doing within real estate that eventually starts to build on each other. Compound interest, right? Einstein said it's the eighth wonder of the world, and it's this idea that it's your actions building on each other. 10 years into this business, there are deals I do today that are the results of efforts I did 3 years ago. Okay, that is huge, right? And so at the end of the day, I think what is necessary is that ultimately it's necessary to understand when you quit too soon. Okay. Leon Johnson, one of my top 3 mentors in real estate. I am so excited to introduce him to you guys, hopefully here soon at some point with an episode. But with Leon, I remember, I want to think it was like 2018, and here I am grinding. I am grinding so hard with my business, and I'm putting in effort. I'm working what feels like easily 7, 8 days a week. And I am putting in so much effort. At that point, the capital is coming and going. I'm having seasons of consistency. I'm having seasons of drought. And I'm at that point, I was starting to get some of my first rentals. But at the end of the day, man, y'all, I wanted to quit. I've wanted to quit investing so many times over the last handful of years. And just because, look, it's been hard for all of us, right? The results don't come fast enough, or you hit enough obstacles and you just are like, I can't take another gut punch, right? And so with that being said, I am ultimately, I think a lot of people get in that space, right? And so I think this is why who you surround yourself matters. I got to a point where I was just telling Leon, like, I think I was talking with him about one of my frustrations. He puts his hand on my shoulder, y'all, and he goes, Courtney, give your efforts time to compound. Okay. It's this idea of don't quit too soon, because all this work you're putting in, it's seeds being sown, and you need to wait until harvest time, right? Too many people, when you're out there and you're sowing the seeds and you're doing all these things and you're working it, you're going to miss the opportunity to benefit. And I am so glad I did not give up. I am so glad that I've continued to let my efforts, have time to compound. So the reality there is too many people quit too soon. It's this idea of when someone comes to me and they say, hey, Courtney, I sent out a whole bunch of direct mail to sellers. Let's just say they're looking to wholesale, right? So they sent a lot of direct mail to sellers looking to wholesale. And I said, hey, okay, so you sent letters to them. Have you gotten a deal out of that? No, I got a handful of phone calls, or some people, maybe not today, maybe, some other time, but I'm like, okay, and as we're talking, they're like, this doesn't work. I want to quit. I'm like, it does not take one batch of, letters to sellers that you get a deal, right? And so what I'm looking for is, hey, you've got to take those next steps, right? There's not going to be that instant gratification. And so there's a level there that there's so many people who are like, hey, either they're sold a lie that it's going to be immediate, and they don't realize the cost of effort. In a past episode with my main mentor, Pete Fortunato, he said in 1965, when he got started, he made 200 offers, not before one was accepted, but before one closed. And so he had plenty of them that got accepted, but they didn't close for a number of reasons, which I think if I could, I would love to break that down with him at some point, because too many people would quit after 20 offers, right? Oh, this stuff doesn't work. I made 20 offers and this, I'm not rich yet. I don't own a property yet. I don't, right? And so you've got to cater your and really adjust your expectations. Real estate, it is not rocket science, you guys, but it's not easy. And so many people give up quickly, too quickly, right? And so one of the best pieces of advice that I ever got was it's this idea of playing the long game. Play the long game in your relationships and your efforts. So anytime you set out to do something, say, look, I'm going to give it a minimum of 6 months to a year. And I'm not going to do, I'm not going to give up. So if you're going to send direct mail to sellers, say, hey, I'm going to do it for 6 months. And you need, again, to properly set your expectations. Sending one letter is not going to result in a lot of deals. You've got to consistently send them, right? And there is a level there that you've got to keep putting in the effort. And as you keep putting in the effort, ultimately, you're planting more and more seeds.
Hey guys, Courtney Fricke here. We've got Aussie Steve. And look, if you have a deal that needs to get moved, Southeast Louisiana, even in South Mississippi, we're your folks. We are the largest dispo company, really in the greater New Orleans area, even Southeast Louisiana. We have great contacts in South Mississippi as well. Steve, why do we move more deals than others?
Just we're very deep in this market, so Greater New Orleans can be really confusing for national wholesalers. The comps are hard. We change block for block. We got flood zones. We get a lot of hurricanes and the likes, and just a lot of the national platforms don't have the buyers on their list. So we are deep with buyers, but we're deep with relationships, which is really important in this market. So we love JVing with out-of-state investors.
Like I said, we do a ton of business with other investors. So go to homebuyerlouisiana.com/Courtney, fill out the information. We'll get in touch with you and we'll move this deal along.
Okay. And so that's tip number one with, one way to avoid shiny object syndrome is staying in the game. Number two, you got to get focused. One of my business partners, Aussie Steve, who's been in previous episodes, he is Australian, and he said it's like being a one-eyed dog in a meat factory. I don't know what that truly means, but a huge part to this is that I find that so many people, they lack the discipline of being focused. So I'm a big fan of a guy named Charlie Munger. He recently passed away. He was a business partner to Warren Buffett, longtime friend and business partner to Warren Buffett. Charlie Munger, a phenomenal investor, and he was heavily in the business space too, though. This is a play on a quote by him, but really, his quote was talking about, without numerical literacy. It's like the idea of without knowing the numbers, you're like a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest, right? You're gonna lose, right? But I'm gonna change that, and I'm gonna say this: without clarity, you are like a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest. You don't stand a chance. Real estate investors, without clarity, you are like a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest. And what does that mean? It is, you've got to know where you are going. One of the things I really appreciate about Steve, so he uses his Aussie term, the one-eyed dog in a meat factory. He has probably been one of the best examples I have seen of focus. What does that mean? I have frequently seen him put the blinders on. So when he got here in America, he tried a few things out. He kind of got his footing, but then he realized that he wanted to build a wholesaling company. And when he did that, what did he do? He put his blinders on. The people that he learned from, the podcasts he listens to, the conversations he's getting around, Sure, he might attend a meetup or a conference that talks about Airbnb or, other things, but he there's a level that he gets so focused. And I think that's one of the main things you can attribute a lot of his success, both in real estate and in his past ventures, has been his a level to put the blinders on and say, hey, look, if it's not about the thing I am focusing on, I'm not giving it any extra attention. So, what is the opposite of shiny object syndrome? It's clarity. Without that clarity, you are putting yourself in a very vulnerable position, right? And so, let's talk through that. What are some ways you can have clarity? What do I mean by clarity? It's the idea of choosing the path you're going to go down. It's also choosing your target. And so this is actually part one of a two-part series. And so this episode and then the next, I'm going to be covering these topics. So here's something that's really critical. Your path, it's going to need to be determined by your target. And so in the next episode, we're going to talk about choosing your target. But this is so important, is your path has to reflect that. And so what does that mean? Once you pick your target, and so next episode, I'm going to talk to you about how do you get clear on, what strategy, how you want to build wealth with real estate, or what do you want to do in real estate? Again, that's the target. We're going to talk about that next. But the reality is that your path needs to be determined by your target. Too many people use, targets that, they change it frequently. And so what is impacted by that, right? I get it. There is so much information, and it's not lost on me that this podcast is just another channel, or my content is just another channel for you to get more information. But there is a level in which you have to learn, you have to say, I am responsible for myself. If you know that you are extra prone to, the shiny object syndrome, I would encourage you to be very careful to attend conferences that introduce you to 12 different new strategies, right? Or if you attend them, I would encourage you to only attend the sessions that, are aligned with what you're trying to accomplish. You've got to understand what is pulling you away. You've got to say, hey, what are the things that are hurting me? Is it listening to every type of podcast on real estate out there? Right? And so, for example, if you're like, hey, I want to have long-term rentals and I want to buy them with creative financing, I want to encourage you to listen to folks, get around folks who have long-term rentals, who are doing, acquiring them with creative financing, right? Why? Because when you get around a group full of flippers, you're going to say, hey, well, this deal that I just bought with seller financing, man, maybe I should sell it. Even though you got fantastic seller financing, right? If all you do is hang around with wholesalers, but you really want to have rentals, well, then what are they going to do? You get something under contract, and what is the influence in your life, pointing you towards wholesaling that contract, right? And so I want to encourage you grow into the conversations you're around, and those conversations come through a multiple of means, right? It comes through the conferences or the seminars or the boot camps or the coaching that you get. It comes through the podcasts you listen to. It comes through the books you read. It comes through the thought leaders and the mentors and the coaches that you give a place of authority to speak into your life. And it also comes into the conversations and the friends and all that you surround yourself with. Think back to when you first started in real estate. And if you had friends that, weren't really into, friends and family that weren't really into real estate, when you would get all excited and talk to them about real estate, what was their response, right? Maybe because they weren't actively in it, they might have said, hey, be careful with that. or okay, like they just weren't so, maybe enthusiastic with the conversations. But, there's a level where as you got around other investors, those conversations, you found encouragement, you found connection, you found community, you found even education and maybe even accountability through those relationships. But it can be very difficult to talk through your struggles as someone who's trying to buy rentals with creative financing with someone who's flipping, right? There's just different struggles. And so I want to encourage you, you grow into the conversations you're around. And so what conversations are you getting around, right? And there is a level that your success can be tied to the level in which you focus on what you are trying to do. And on the other end of that focus is you have to have the discipline to box out other things, especially if you're more prone to the shiny object syndrome. So this is tough. I mean, when I read books, I go and I say, hey, what are the things I'm focusing on for, let's just say 2025? What am I focusing on? And so what do? I go look at my library, or I look at some book, a list of books I have that I've yet to purchase that I want to purchase. And I say, hey, what are my goals? And what do I need to read that's in line with that? Okay. Maybe it has to do with raising private capital to support my goal of owning more rentals, right? Well, then I want to be reading books around that, right? Whatever that may be. And so I want to encourage you. I want to encourage you to take assessment. Where are you vulnerable, right? And know when to build in, whether it's putting on the blinders, whether it's just assessing and being aware of what you're vulnerable to, in the sense of like, hey, if I go and listen to every single podcast out there or attend, conferences, every single conference, I can be swayed, and basically I'm going to move from one strategy to the next and not give this one strategy enough effort. If you can be honest enough with yourself, build in some boundaries, that is the start of you starting to build in some defense against shiny object syndrome. And so I believe clarity, so clarity on your target comes from two things. At least this has been my experience. Clarity comes from trial and error and exposure. So what is trial and error? Trial and error is, I do believe in the beginning, you've got to have a level, where you're either going to go try a few things, but again, you've got to give it enough time, right? You can't say, oh, I'm gonna go try this for a week. You got to say, hey, I'm gonna go try this for a year. And in my story, what I did is I started off flipping. I did flipping for many, many years. And ultimately, I just realized I was doing what I hated. But I thought that's what I had to do. I'm not saying I don't still rehab properties, because I rehab properties that I buy to keep as rentals. I can tell you I don't buy full guts anymore. If I do, I'm going to bring on a partner, or I'm going to wholesale it, right? Or I'm going to do some other, I'm not going to go in and renovate that myself. I have learned through trial and error that'll burn me out very quickly. And that's not getting me closer to my overall targets and my goals. Okay. So trial and error, right? It can be, I just don't enjoy what it takes to get this. It could be, a number of things. I'm not saying pitch yourself, don't get uncomfortable. I'm not saying don't challenge yourself. I'm not saying, go after trial and error and come with, go after whatever comes easiest. No. Sometimes you just got to do, you're like, oh, this looks good on paper, but when you do it, you realize there's things people don't talk about, right? And that was it with flipping. Flipping really burned me out. And it really stole the joy from me. And it was soul destroying for me. And I'm very glad that I realized that, and have since been in recovery for the most part, or the flips I do now are very modified. Um, that's trial and error. The second part of that is exposure. And clarity comes from exposure. And what I mean by that, it's who you're getting exposed to. And so one of the things I told people very early on is go listen to the first 200 episodes for Bigger Pockets, the original Bigger Pockets, not the rookie or on the market or whatever. Go listen to that. In the first, 1 to 200 episodes, they do all these different interviews, and they're interviewing different folks. And even in my episodes, right, you're getting exposed to different folks. And in doing that, you're getting to hear how different people have attained different levels of success with real estate. And through that exposure, what I found was there's a handful of people that I really said, well, wait, hold on. I like what they have going on here. Maybe I like the results they got. Maybe I like there's some of the things that they got out of it that wasn't just the money or other things like that. And so a huge part to this is that I want to encourage you. I want to encourage you to continue to get exposed, especially if you're like, hey, I'm looking for that clarity. I want to encourage you to acknowledge, number one, what's your exposure rate? Are you getting exposed to people? You want to be careful of something called an echo chamber, which is, for example, if you only get around people who are in single family, well, what's your exposure? Single family. And so if you're only around people in single family, let's just say single family long-term rentals, well, that's your level of exposure. And so you're not getting exposed to multifamily or other commercial, you're not getting exposed to flipping, other things. And that's all good and fine being in that room if you have that clarity. But if you don't have the clarity yet, be careful of echo chambers. And one of the other things is once I got outside the real estate echo chamber, so being in just real estate rooms, I also got some clarity. So that's also something that has helped me. I mean, I went to conferences that were not just about real estate, but were about investing in general. And that also helped me. And so ultimately, exposure is huge. I remember when I first met Leon Johnson, I had been in the business 4 or 5 years at that point. And look, I had paid for coaching. A lot of my exposure and mentors had been people who were flipping and wholesaling. So a lot of what I was being taught was scale, 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 scale. Build out a business, delegate, volume, volume, volume. And so a lot of my mentors and my exposure, came from social media, came from YouTube, came from podcasts. And it was guys who were on the West Coast who were been in the business 10, maybe 15 years. And they, a lot of what they were teaching was, basically, buy 100 properties a year and aim for 100,000, 500,000, $1 million months in revenue and just go, 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 build, build, build. And I just thought that that's what this is. And that was all I got exposed to in those beginning years, it felt like. I guess I just saw so much of that. I thought that was the thing. And I might have saw a few other little things, but I get those were the squeakiest wheels, right? And then I met Leon. And I'm at this point when I meet Leon, I'm getting burned out with flipping and wholesaling and volume, and building my team and doing, all the things I just talked about, right? And ultimately, when I met him, where Leon, he didn't like the idea of flipping and wholesaling. He gave a whole new perspective to flipping and wholesaling, where flipping and wholesaling for him was a major tax event. And yeah, you can make that money, but that quick money today, but it spends. And what I remember being at his house and we had a crawfish boil and I went to help him throw all the crawfish heads in his pond. And he had 75 acres. And so we're driving on the side by side, and he starts pointing out that that's one of his rentals. All these properties adjoined to his were some of his rentals. And it was just like everywhere that the light touched was something that a property that he owned. And I just remember just being like, this guy goes and fly fishes, for a month at a time. And like he had all these benefits from rentals. And I just remember just looking at this guy and just saying, wow, there's something here. I just remember, number one, it was not only the results he had, but how he approached real estate, that something in me stood up. And I said, I want to reflect what this guy has, right? I want to emulate how he approaches real estate. And if I can get a fraction of what he has, I would consider myself happy and successful. And so it was the exposure. And then what happened was I found guys that, Leon introduced me to some of his colleagues and his mentors. And then I got exposed to a lot of other people who were doing similar to that. And that just really fortified my decision. Through that exposure, it was how I wanted to approach real estate. And it was people who were getting what I wanted to get out of real estate. And so I really want to encourage you. I want to encourage you that if you do not feel that you have a level of clarity, I want to encourage you to go on to take a season to get clarity. And in this next episode, this here's part 1. And part 2, I want to break down what my clarity has looked like and what ultimately brought me there. And I want to talk about how do you figure out the target. We're kind of talking a little bit about clarity and the need for it and how to protect yourself against shiny object syndrome in this episode. But next episode, I want to get very clear on, ultimately picking your target. How do you define it and all of that? Appreciate you guys tuning in. Don't forget, if you enjoy this, guys, make sure to like and subscribe or share this with someone who you would feel would get something out of it. And as always, guys, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. You can connect with me at Courtney Fricke on most social media platforms. And as always, guys, I appreciate you tuning in to the Strategic Success Podcast.